I'd really like to give you a hug, if that's okay, the man said as he approached me, and I immediately embraced him. Surprised by my gesture, he tensed up and then relaxed into our hug. This man had committed a sexual offense that led to a 20-year prison sentence and mandatory sexual abuse treatment in the community upon his release. It was after one of these sessions when our hug took place. Now, most people are surprised and disturbed by the humanity with which I approached a man who committed rape. But what if, once we got beyond our surprise, this led to an important insight about how we deal with sex crimes? I'm a sex crimes researcher, and I've spent the better part of the last 15 years trying to understand how to prevent sexual abuse. I've studied why sexual abuse happens, why it remains such a significant public health crisis, and how to prevent sexual victimization from happening before it ever occurs. It didn't take me long to make a surprising discovery. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, there were a series of horrifying, nightmarish cases of young children who were abducted, sexually violated, and murdered by strangers. In the aftermath, state and federal governments began pushing for legislation to combat sexual violence. And in 1994, they passed the Jacob Wetterling Act, which was amended in 1996 to include Megan's Law. Taken together, this required all 50 states to create public registries that included information on the whereabouts and demographics of people with sex offense convictions. By 2003, all 50 states had public internet registries, and since that time, our laws have only become more broad and harsh. By mid-year 2018, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children estimated that there were just over 904,000 people on our public registries, and we are fast approaching 1 million people. The original purpose of this legislation was public safety, but at the end of the day, these laws do not work, and they don't make us any safer. At best, these laws are ineffective. At worst, they create the very conditions necessary for reoffending to occur, like making it difficult for people to find safe and affordable housing, difficulty finding stable employment, and hardships creating and maintaining positive pro-social relationships. People who commit sex crimes do so for a variety of reasons. But one of the things we've learned is that many of these individuals experienced childhood adversity and trauma at significantly higher rates than the general population. Many of these individuals lacked secure attachments in early childhood that often lead to maladaptive and problematic behavior. Does this excuse or justify their actions? Absolutely not. But it helps us to understand why some people offend and how to treat them. Many of these individuals grew up disconnected from those who were meant to protect them. And current sex crimes policies further disconnect people from communities and resources. Restorative justice offers an alternative solution. Essentially, restorative justice promotes opportunities for a series of productive interactions that focus on the harm caused and not the specific criminal statute violated. The person who has caused harm must fully accept responsibility for their behavior. They must fully acknowledge their wrongdoing. And the person who has been harmed has the opportunity to speak their truth. Now, I fully recognize that this is a controversial and confronting concept to embrace. It makes sense to me why I have been called a sex offender lover and a rape apologist. But I still wholeheartedly believe in the restorative justice process. And there's a very particular reason why. A young man raped me when I was just 16 years old. I was a socially awkward teen, a loner with this curly, frizzy, untamable hair. And I was at my first house party at a beach house on the South Florida coast. But I spent much of the evening sitting on a brown leather couch watching the party unfold around me. When a young man came and sat next to me to chat, his attention flattered me. When he asked me to go for a walk on the beach with him, I went. We approached an area of the beach with these large rock piles, and I immediately stopped walking. I knew exactly where we were. I had spent many of my childhood summer days scrambling over these rocks. During the day, the beach was filled with sunbathing tourists and colorful umbrellas, but on a Saturday night close to midnight, it was eerily desolate. I want to go back to the party, I said as a knot rose in my throat. But I thought you wanted the same thing I did, he said as he grabbed for my wrist. He grabbed my wrist, I pulled away. He tried to grab for my arm. I tried to pull away. I tried to fight. We struggled, and then I stopped fighting. What happened next was humiliating and violent. I separated from my body and watched my rape from somewhere above the scene. The rape felt like it lasted for an eternity, but in reality, I have no sense of the time. When he was finished, he threw my wet clothes at me and told me to get dressed, and then began apologizing repeatedly. I shook uncontrollably, unable to speak, let alone acknowledge his words. One of my flip-flops had been lost in the surf, and I transferred all of my panic, my fear, and my pain to this loss. It was a tangible problem compared to the incomprehensible experience that I had just endured. I searched anxiously over the rocks and in the wet sand in the dark for my flip-flop, but I never found it. The loss of my flip-flop is a small symbol of the enormous sense of loss that I experienced because of this rape. Suffice to say, the time between walking out of that party and searching aimlessly for my flip-flop in the dark fundamentally and forever changed the course of my life. I have since dedicated my entire adult life to understanding every facet of sexual abuse. I have immersed myself in a career that most people find unnerving. I have continued my research and advocacy, writing about the negative impacts of sex crimes policies. I have taught classes on sexual violence and victimization, and I have listened as students have shared their experiences with sexual violence, both as those who have perpetrated it and those who have experienced it. All the while, I remain silent about the fact that I myself am a rape survivor. I had falsely believed that my academic pursuits and my title, Dr. Ackerman, sex crimes expert, were proof to myself that I had healed. But even with my academic expertise and my close network of fellow professionals, I've remained silent. Now, I'd like you to think about that for a moment. I'm a writer. I'm a public speaker. I am a person of words. And yet, in a field full of experts on sexual violence, I remained silent for 15 years. And in that silence, my emotions were out of control. I hated him. I blamed myself for the entire thing. And for years, I engaged in all forms of self-harming behavior. In the direct aftermath of my rape, I began drinking heavily. My grades suffered, my relationship suffered, and my mental health suffered. I was reckless, and I was angry. It has now been almost 20 years since my rape, and I have done a lot of trauma and healing work. And I've made peace with the fact that this will forever be a part of the fabric of who I am. But something changed one evening when I had the unique opportunity to meet with a group of men who had committed various sexual offenses. Visibly shaking, I took my seat among the circle of men. Now, for years, I have been face to face with people who have committed sex crimes, but I have always done so with the protective Dr. Ackerman shield. On this occasion, I was Alissa, rape survivor. I shared the details of my experience with the men and talked about the insidious impacts of sexual trauma, like my inability to roughhouse with my children, the difficult and painful nature of physical touch, the terrifying flashbacks, the exhausting panic attacks, my fear of the dark, the fact that at that point I had not swam in the ocean surf in 17 years. The men listened intently and with deep respect. I could feel feel their empathy and compassion. It was after that first session when I heard the words, "I'd really like to give you a hug, if that's okay." And I immediately embraced this man. A man who had committed a violent rape and a woman who had experienced one, embracing. It was a simple gesture that bridged an abyss that only connection can bridge. And it was one of the most powerful moments of my entire life. Current sex crimes policies don't work because they fuel disconnection, they fuel isolation, and they fuel shame. Restorative justice promotes opportunities for healing, understanding, and accountability. You see, to be raped is to be harmed in a deeply personal way. There is the before rape, there is the after rape, and in many ways they remain forever disconnected. But you see, healing from intimate harm requires connection. The night after that life-changing hug, a close friend drove me out to the beach where I was raped. It had been 17 years since I searched for my flip-flop in the dark. The moon was brighter than I remembered, and the air was cooler, but I felt no fear as I stood in the spot that forever changed my life. I made peace with this place, with what happened to me, and with the man who hurt me. I turned back to my friend and smiled. "It's just a beach," I said. It's the men in that first treatment group that gave me the strength to go back to the place where I was raped. They listened intently with deep respect and empathy, and I was vulnerable with them in a way that few have ever witnessed. In return, they taught me what it meant to truly be listened to. Since that first group, I have facilitated or participated in restorative justice sessions with over 350 men and women who have committed various acts of sexual abuse. I do this for my own healing, but also because I continue to witness and experience life-changing and life-affirming moments that happened simply because of authentic, vulnerable, and intimate connection. Reactive public policies that name, shame, and isolate people might make us feel safe, but they don't make us any safer. Wanting revenge and lifetime suffering for people who sexually violate others makes sense. But as valid as these feelings are, they do not and they will not decrease sexual violence. Healing from intimate harm requires connection. Uncomfortable, but necessary connection. Hugging a man who committed a violent rape might not be for everyone, but wholehearted listening and engaging difficult conversations most certainly is. Each and every one of us has the capacity to heal society's most intimate wounds, one connection at a time. Thank you.